trials already designed by world-class medical researchers in New Zealand, Australia and the UK. So those trials are ready to go as soon as our product is ready to be put into the trials. It's not a cheap exercise, but we're committed to doing that, and we can actually do that under the existing legislation because it allows for research and product development, but what it doesn't allow for is obviously the commercial sale of those products. So theoretically we could have a clinical trial, prove that it's safe and effective, and have to then manufacture it overseas and bring it back into the country to be able to provide it to patients in New Zealand, and obviously that's going to push up the price, and our goal is to make something that's both effective and affordable for New Zealand patients. We also have some significant export orders, and if we're able to export, it's going to create significant jobs on the East Coast. The facilities we're looking at, it's about 120 people, 10,000 square metres under glass. There's big demand for GMP pharmaceutical grade CBD extract overseas, and New Zealand's got a great brand and as a safe source of product, not needing horticulture. So lots of opportunities there in terms of economic development for the regions. But that window's closing, so really keen to see this legislation move forward and for the regulations to be set up as quickly as possible to allow us to do that. The main points that we raised today are just the first is around CBD and the classification. I think there's been a number of submitters, and you're going to hear from some more who, like us, argue that it shouldn't be discriminated against in the way that it is at the moment. It's another cannabinoid. Then there are many cannabinoids in the plant, and I guess as the WHO has found, it's not addictive. It's you can't overdose on it. There's no real reason for it to be restricted in the way that it has. And what we suggest instead is that you look at the THC levels and you put a restriction on those rather than CBD in terms of what constitutes a CBD product. As I said, the export opportunity is there, and what that will allow us to do is build facilities and build a company that is able to produce on scale, and that reduces the cost obviously for New Zealanders. So we're really keen, while there are provisions in the existing Act for exporting controlled drugs, it would be great if you're able to include the word export alongside the word import in the section 14(1)(a) to make it really explicit that export is encouraged under the legislation, or enabled at least. And there's plenty of controls in place through the narcotics, drugs and the Single Convention on Narcotics and the International Narcotics Control Board, who basically look around the world at the levels of narcotic drugs that are required and what's being produced and what's needed, and they regulate that trade between countries. And so it would be a government-to-government export arrangements and the management of the product from seed to sale. We use a platform called MJ Freeway, which was developed in the States, and it tracks the plant from the seed. Each plant has a barcode. Every gram of waste we have to account for, and we track where it goes, how long it's stored for, who's driving it around, and so on. So there's a lot of control around that side of things, and in the international context, I think that would be just as stringent. So I guess reassuring you that there's ways that controlled drugs are already exported and managed around the world, and this would just be another one of those. There's also the quality standards that are in place, and I guess we support a range of opportunities for product development. We've certainly focused on the pharmaceutical end and GMP pharma grade, which ensures that the quality and consistency is there, and getting the medicines approved in due course through the clinical trials. We also really want to encourage you to think about the resources, and I'm not sure if this is part of the legislation, but the resource that goes into setting up these regulations and the oversight of the legislation. I think you need to try and encourage your colleagues to make sure that there's adequate budget assigned for that role. There's, we want those regulators to be able to do their job well, and to have a world-class system, not one that's inadequately funded. And our suggestion there is that you look at taxing the industry and setting aside those taxes to support both subsidies for patients, make it even more affordable, and to invest in the oversight, regulatory oversight, and in clinical trials for New Zealand products. We've had good support from Crown Research Institutes and various government agencies. Callaghan Innovation have done extraction work for us, and ESR do the testing. We've got some good relationships there, but it'd be great to see some focused public investment in that space. Fourth one is just we support and encourage you to allow for people with old convictions to be allowed to work in the industry. We don't think they'll necessarily be the licensee and be responsible for the whole operation, but as with the hemp regulations at present, a previous conviction doesn't exclude you from being able to work with hemp, and it sounds like the ministry are thinking that will be the same for medical cannabis, and we support that. There's lots of people that would love to work in the industry, and this is a great opportunity for them to move out of the illicit industry and into a legal one where they don't have to look over their shoulders with the police, and they can use those skills in really well paid, safe jobs. And just the last one now, our position on who should have access to the products. We really support the Medical Cannabis Awareness New Zealand submission that anyone with severe or debilitating condition should, with the support of their doctor, be able to access it without fear of prosecution. Just on the handout there, there's a table. We've got some of the results from our products that have been extracted, the plants. And you can see there the CBD levels in one of the extracts is 88%. I think at the moment 98% of total cannabinoids is what classifies a product as a CBD product. And I guess that's where we'd say, look, if we can shift it around and maybe it's 2% THC or something, but if we can look at putting the emphasis on the THC rather than the CBD levels, there's many other bioactives in the plant, other cannabinoids and terpenes and so on. But you can see we're close, and this is just with approved hemp strains that we're growing at the moment, and we've got access to some seed from overseas that's higher in CBD again, and looking to grow that in the next few months. And just down the bottom is a diagram taking the information from Medical Cannabis Awareness New Zealand's chart of the various products and the price per milligram. You can see where we've got a fully costed business plan. We started our investment roadshow last night in Te Aroha, and there's a lot of support there. This is I don't expect any of you to be investors in the company because that would be a conflict of interest. But, we're going out raising funds at present, and the business plan is there. It's costed down to the last dollar, and we're confident we can deliver products substantially, at a quarter of the price at least of imported, and at an improved quality in terms of having those clinical trials connected to them. Won't be as cheap as grow your own, but for doctors and for patients that want certainty and consistency, we're confident that we can deliver a product that's superior and cheaper than what can be imported. Just on the back are our sort of responses to some of the concerns that have been raised around the evidence of efficacy, the risk of the product being diverted for unintended purposes, and the risk of harm to individual users and to society, and just some of the latest evidence there, and some references for your reading pleasure. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So first we have Shane, then Matt.
Thanks for a really good presentation. This is really interesting. One observation and then just one point of clarification. In the booklet you've given us here, Captain James Cook's mission to the South Pacific was driven by the needs of the British Empire to source hemp or hemp alternatives. Kind of an interesting reflection on history. We don't need to go down that path because on a different
There's a whole book on it if you're interested.
Okay, I get it. There are others who would offer a different view. But really my question is, primarily you're growing cannabidiol? Is that, I just want to understand that.
At this stage, I guess our goal will be in time once we've got the facilities set up and the regulators are confident in the system. Because what they've said to us is growing hemp at present, there's certain security requirements we have to do for that, but because we're pretty much going to be growing the same plant in that it's below the THC threshold of 0.35%, they seem more comfortable and yes, supportive of that initially. In time, I guess we'd be looking to, if we can, produce products that are higher in THC if there's the evidence in the market for it. But to keep everybody sort of as comfortable as possible to start with, the idea is that we'd grow plants that are low in THC and we'll be focusing on CBD products initially, for the first 2 or 3 years at least.
Yeah.
You were saying that you have a medical cannabis cultivation licence currently with MOH. Do you need this bill to progress?
We do if we want to be able to sell the product. So we can grow it for research purposes,
Right.
and we can do the clinical trials and so on. But what comes out of that, we can't do anything with in New Zealand.
Can I just, I just want to stop on that. So the clinical trials that you'll be contributing to in Australia, have they asked for specific blends of CBD THC? And I'm really interested. We've heard evidence about the effectiveness of the combination. But the trials in Australia, are they for specific illnesses? And do you see in the future kind of like different blends for Parkinson's or, people who are suffering the effects of cancer, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, the clinical trials we've commissioned and designed are based in New Zealand. And they, initially, the phase 1 trials are just to prove safety. So it tests dosage and tolerance. And that's to give everyone confidence that wherever it goes from there, it's going to be safe. So it's a group of healthy adult male volunteers who are the guinea pigs for that. And what we have after that is a product that medical researchers around the world can then access and use, because most of these products are tied up by big pharmaceutical companies, and so medical researchers struggle to get access to a proven safe product. And so that's one of our markets, is to be able to develop a product that's proven safe in New Zealand. We can license that or give it to medical researchers to do their medical research in New Zealand. We'll do it overseas to test it on a range of products. So phase 2 would be a small group for a particular condition using that. So this is what we're looking at the moment. It's a mix of the extract that's through the CO2 supercritical fluid extraction process in vegetable oil as an oral syringe that goes in your mouth with a specific dosage, so 100 milligrams of CBD per mil of formula. That's all been worked out. There's still stability trials we have to do to make sure we can work out how long it's going to last on the shelf and that sort of stuff. But once that product is able to be produced, getting close to that now, we'll put that into clinical trial in New Zealand, and then whatever conditions people think it may be useful for, that'll be trialled. We can do a range of dosages in terms of the concentration or other cannabinoids that we're interested in later on.
Thank you for that. Matt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, thank you for a good submission. I think very balanced. I probably represent an electorate that's probably fairly conservative on this issue. Probably, defaults to it being a bit of a fringe, off-the-wall issue, but I think you pitch very professionally, and I think that's what the sector needs. And I think it's important that you touched on your last page some of the issues still to be worked through, because it's okay to be saying actually there's still stuff to do. Because, say, no one's claiming cannabis to be a magical plant, but there's plenty of submitters who do. I mean, if we believe that me and you could smoke a joint and have a full set of hair pretty quickly.
Yes!
Bring that product into play.
We can do some research on that.
One of my questions, if I can, Madam Chair, point 3, the risk of harm to individual users in society. So when you say the strongest evidence from overseas, use of cannabis amongst young people would increase. So I'm presuming that's jurisdictions that's just allowed open access to cannabis, not just necessarily medicinal cannabis that we're talking today.
Yep.
But as a sector, when you weigh that up, obviously you believe that in the overall balance, an increased use of cannabis use amongst young people and the potential risk that poses is an acceptable risk for having the sector to move forward.
I guess we are saying that, and part of it's your guys' job to work out what the rules are around how we reduce that risk as much as possible, and don't repeat the mistakes that some other jurisdictions may have, where they've made it too accessible too quickly, and young people have increased their use of it.
Yeah, okay.
But you've also highlighted there that it reduces binge drinking. So it's kind of, you know,
And another question, if I can.
And tobacco use.
yeah.
You do talk about this sort of approach of exporting. I'm not sure, especially in our subcommittee where we've had a submission around the export. What I'm also interested in is the cannabis scheme is actually very silent. So in this bill, so a couple of questions there. What discussions has your sector already had with the minister or the ministry? And will you be a bit frustrated if the scheme kind of all of a sudden gets published and you find you can't do something like exporting? Meaning, wouldn't it be better if we were able to actually debate the scheme here?
Yes, I'm not sure if this is there's not a lot of opportunity for us to have input into that. I think there's potentially some other workshops with the ministry and MPI and biosecurity and customs and things need to be part of those conversations, I think, with the sector. I think that is a really important point that we need to, as the industry, as people that are interested in it, need to have input into that process rather than just waiting for it to be rolled out and announced.
So at this point, you've had your organisation or your sector hasn't had discussions with the minister.
No.
Yeah. So what? So ultimately, in a business perspective, that must be a business risk because you're arguing we should be exporting it, and then theoretically, in a few weeks, it could get rolled out, say no to export.
Yeah, though the legislation, Misuse of Drugs Act, already allows for export of controlled drugs under particular conditions, and what we're saying is let the minister and the officials determine what the standard should be for those products that do get exported. So rather than just saying any medical cannabis can be exported, the minister can determine what those rules should be so that we can set those quality standards and the public and everybody can have confidence in what is being sold.
That's one final question again. So you would expect some consultation and some potential input into that cannabis scheme going forward?
Definitely appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's good.
Thank you, Manu. Very good submission.
Yep.
Now, the Hemp Foundation.
Yes, it's an impossible name, isn't it?
Huh?
Tadgh.
Hi. Hello, Tadgh.
Good morning, everyone. I heard a lot of laughter this morning, which was great to hear. I hope it wasn't because of our submission. I know we asked you to consider some fairly, radical repositioning in your thinking.
So just before you go on, is Dr. Ben Jensen with us?
Yes.
Hello? Are you there, Dr. Jensen?
I'm here.
Oh, wonderful.
Fantastic.
So you'll,
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning.
so
Good.
we're just starting your submission. Welcome, and I guess you'll do a duo. And
Ben's really here for, in case any of the biochemistry gets a bit over my head in terms of the medical professionals in the room. May I please ask first, how many people have actually managed to read our submission? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. And how many people have questions for that submission? Because I actually want to move pretty much beyond the submission here. Normally these conversations take an hour, and at the end of the hour, we're ready to have a conversation. So we've only got 15 minutes, and we don't have much time. So you talked, Mr. Ducey, about how your electorate sees this as a bit of a fringe issue. And you have to take an enormous amount of information on this topic. And I'm sure you find it interesting, fascinating, and a bit overwhelming. But I felt the same way when I was a boy, and I watched every night the news, and every night I saw the Middle East, and I saw the Israelis and the Palestinians, and I heard how there was a crisis in the occupied territories, and through my entire childhood I watched that, and I never learned a thing. I never understood what was going on from all of the information I was given. There is no such thing as medicinal cannabis. Medicinal cannabis does not exist. All right? We are complex, self-regulating, biochemical, electrical organisms. We are self-regulating. And as Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. What is unique about cannabis is that it is full of the fatty molecules which every animal in the world, every species of life on Earth, except for insects, uses to regulate its own homeostasis, its own upregulation or downregulation of cellular activity. This is why we have such a bewildering, baffling, confusing array of therapeutic effects connected to cannabis. However, it's not about getting high. It's not about smoking. Smoking is the least effective way to use cannabis. So you can treat some symptoms by using cannabis in that way. But basically, you're destroying cannabis and you're converting its most essential acid forms into other, less therapeutic forms. So, for example, GW Pharmaceuticals, which makes Sativex, which is the only legal CBD, THC medicine in New Zealand, they say themselves in a 2015 patent that the acid forms, which they don't use in their compounds, the acid forms, which come from the raw plant, the acid forms which require no processing because they're already packaged by Mother Nature in the plant, the acid forms are 50% more therapeutic than the compounds that they are providing in their medications. Now, Medicines Control and the Ministry of Health are saying that a CBD product should be 98% CBD. Now, that's almost a single isolate, and single isolates are the least therapeutic because while a violin makes beautiful music, the symphony has the power, and it's the same with cannabinoids. It's called the entourage effect, and you may have heard of it referred to already so far. The entourage effect works with the acids. The acids come from the raw form. The raw form comes from the plant. Mr. Ducey, this is a mainstream issue. It's the cover of Time magazine. It's a mainstream issue because we all have an endogenous, inside our body, cannabinoid system, and it is unique. It is unique in that it can retrograde our cellular communication, it can down-regulate our cellular activity, and it can up-regulate our cellular activity, physiologically and psychologically. So it is unique in that regard. So it's not magical, but it is of incredible potential, but nobody is talking, I call it, nobody's talking about the elephant in the room, which is we have this unique biological system of health regulation. It is in all of our major organ and tissue systems, and we actually have, 44% of our GPs retire within 10 years. The boomers are retiring now. We have a crisis of obesity and diabetes, and we're going to have cognitive deficits, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, all of these things. And our health system is already buckling. So our health system is already buckling. Half our GPs are retiring. The boomers are retiring. So there's a crisis approaching us. What are the effective, low-cost ways we can apply preventative medicine? Because your body's endogenous cannabinoid system is your ambulance at the top of the health cliff. Now, this is a diet-based system, which may be related to why it's not taught in medical schools. Medical schools don't have a lot of time for nutrition, even though Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And Thomas Edison, even back in the 19th century, was saying, physicians of the future will not treat conditions with drugs. They will treat conditions with nutrition. Nutrition science is a very legitimate science, but it's one that is overwhelmed by the pharmaceutical influence in policy, economy, and education. So the Hemp Foundation is an organization that has been called for in documents repeatedly through time, including, I have some documents here for you, sorry, more documents. This one is Cannabis Therapeutics. It's a novel approach to pain and other chronic disease state management. This was written by a senior national drug policy analyst within the New Zealand government, who's a pharmacologist as well. Thank you very much. Yes, please. There's, it goes down to that boring-looking one for each one. Thank you. And so there's a really great definition of the endocannabinoid system in that. And he got that definition after going to the Royal Pharmaceutical Society and the Academy of Pharmaceutical Sciences in the UK in 2008, where they were holding a joint convention on cannabis therapeutics. He spoke to the drug companies. He spoke to the scientists. I wasn't surprised by anything in this document apart from his spelling mistakes, which are numerous. But I was surprised that in 2008, the government had this document. Because for 10 years, we've seen no advance in comprehension publicly from the ministry. I started calling the Ministry of Harm, to be honest, because we are missing so many opportunities. 30 countries have legal medical cannabis programs. 30 states in the US have legal medical cannabis programs. In those states, doctors are prescribing 4,500 less medicines on average without a best practice medical system. That's $1 billion that we could be saving in pharmaceuticals, and not only would be saving that expense, but people like Manu and Hikurangi Hemp could actually be producing it domestically so that the revenue remains within our economy, which is, I'm sure you'll agree, is important. We can't keep exporting tax-free profits to Facebook and Google and Amazon. We need to make money ourselves with our own businesses, our own people, and we need to reduce our costs as well.
So we have 5 more minutes. I'm just wondering if this is a good time. Has anyone got any questions?
It's a lot to take in, and I do apologize for that. But, you know, when I started this project 2 years ago, I knew more about cannabis than most people. And I was very upset by the talk I heard coming from government. I found it fundamentally misleading. So I thought, okay, how can I educate doctors as to this? So I threw myself into the biggest research project of my life. I'm a historian, I'm a social scientist, I'm a school teacher. I used to want to be a policeman, I used to want to be an MP. Instead, I chose a different vocation. And
I think Nikki's got a question for you.
I've just got a question. Perhaps then you could explain to us why we have this fear of young people and cannabis, and why we have been told by other experts that there's up to a 10% group of people who have issues if they're involved with cannabis in terms of psychosis and things like that.
Those numbers are not correct. So specialists, and you'll notice that by and large your specialists, the NZMA, the Pharmaceutical Society, even the Marijuana Research Institute, how their submissions were essentially information-free. That's because they have conflicts of interest. The Pharmaceutical Society is basically concerned with protecting its market share. So the medical model was built as cannabis was excluded. Prior to this, the medical model was based upon both botanicals, medicines derived from plants, and it was derived upon chemical medicines. But around that point in time, we've had a transition, and as we've had a transition, the system has closed out the opposition. So for us to meet the gold standard the medical profession desires, we need to have RCTs. Now, cannabis made up half of all medicines in the USA and Europe for 50 years and was used to treat over 100 different conditions. For us to run stage 3 clinical trials in all of those conditions, for all of those things, will cost tens of billions of dollars. Now, pharma's not going to do that because they could lose 30% of their profits overnight if plant cannabis was legalized, because cannabis operates through the same G protein coupled receptors.
Can you give us any information? I mean, that's your idea, and I'm quite happy to accept that.
Sorry, I didn't really
can
answer
you
the
give
question.
us any factual information that refutes the fact that cannabis is bad for young minds, and that 10% of people that number can end up with psychosis?
No, that's completely incorrect.
So can you give us evidence?
Well, I can give you evidence. If you look to the rates of mental illness in every society where cannabis has use, you will see they do not climb. Over the last 40 years, where cannabis use has gone up tenfold, our rates of psychosis have not gone up tenfold. And CBD is an antipsychotic. And we've known this since at least 2003, when the Department of Health of the United States of America took out a patent on it as a neuroprotectant and antioxidant. So what we have, in 1937, we had a Rupert Murdoch epic miseducation, moral panic upon a society that was not connected and was very trusting. And they all knew him. And they all knew cannabis because they all took it as medicines, they all wore clothes of it, and it was used, and their money was made of it. But marijuana, and Mexicans and African Americans, they'd never heard of marijuana, and they were scared of Mexicans, and they were scared of African Americans, and in the Reefer Madness campaign, it was all tied up together. If I have plenty of evidence and plenty of documents, which I'd be glad to email your office with to address these concerns, and if we could have a dialogue, please think of us as a resource. The Hemp Foundation's goal from this meeting is to impress upon you the fact that we are aware of research that you may not be across, that we would like to secure ourselves a place on the advisory group for the passage of the laws, because we don't have any commercial interest in the outcomes. We simply want best practice. We simply want a health system that will endure. We simply want a society that will prosper.
You make that point that you'd like to be involved in the regulations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. I really
Wonderful.
appreciate it.
Appreciate your
Thanks,
speech.
Ben.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen.
No.
We now have the New Zealand Pain Society. And who will I be addressing, please? Is it John? John. Oh, that's John. Okay. New Zealand Hemp Industries, Richard Birch. Welcome to the Health Select Committee, Richard. Thank you for making a submission. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
So to the Chair, I'd like to acknowledge the opportunity to come and speak to you. Thank you very much for that opportunity. As you said, my name is Richard Barge from the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association. I'm the Deputy Chair of an organisation which is a trade organisation, a non-profit incorporated society started in 1997. So we've been involved in the hemp industry for a number of years, and we have over 100 members. Over half of those are growers, another 25% processors, and the other 25% are researchers and service providers to the industry, or interested in being service providers to the industry. So the reason why we've come to see you really is around the low THC industrial hemp, because we have regulations in place, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I just wanted to acknowledge our objectives in coming to see you. The objectives from the NZHIA's point of view, the three that really are relevant to our presentation today, to ensure that government legislation and compliance issues are necessary, workable and industry friendly. The removing of industrial hemp from the prohibited botanicals list, and supporting the industry to be able to make and market hemp products from all parts of the hemp. So that's where we're coming from the industry. Now, you would have heard many submissions from many organisations around the health implications and the concerns from doctors and things, so I won't sort of go into too much detail, but you'll be appreciative of the wide range of medical conditions that are potentially available to be treated by medicinal cannabis. The problems faced by the medical profession in prescribing medical cannabis and having approval for that. The lack of understanding around prescriptions. The wide points of view and range of those points of view and passion about them. And specifically, you'll be familiar with the CBD as being a cannabinoid in cannabis. Now, you'll also be aware that that's one of a number of cannabinoids, THC as being the other topical one. But when I started in the late 90s, there was probably 60 cannabinoids, and now there's over 100. So we're just discovering more and more of them all the time. The endocannabinoid system is an example of recent discoveries. I mean, the 1990s. So you've got THC discovered in 1964 in Israel, and then we've only just recently discovered acknowledged an endocannabinoid system in our own bodies. So there's a lot of research going on in this space, and the reason why there's not a lot of clinical data is clearly that there was not availability of the ability to actually do any research because it was illegal. So if we touch on that for a moment, I mean, you've got centuries of use of this in India and Chinese medicines. You've got it being a wide range of applications in the American pharmacopoeia up until 1937, when it was effectively taxed out of existence by the Marijuana Tax Act. And that spawned a whole regime around the world of prohibiting cannabis to be used. So really, we've only had one use for it, and that's been illegal recreational use. And now we're going full circle and coming back to all this information that was available in the past and being able to use it to go forward. Unfortunately, that doesn't provide the clinical, at the top end level of clinical trials that the doctors prescribe. But that will come, and it's already started to come. But the observation that I would make would be that, that the cat's well and truly out of the bag. I mean, it speaks to the efficacy of the product that people are using their own money and going to an illegal black market situation to actually make it happen for themselves. So if there wasn't some benefit to it, why would these people do that? Okay, so going on to the other reasons, I mean, you would have also acknowledged the entourage effect. I heard the previous speaker, Tadgh, mention that. That's an important consideration because that goes to the point that there is single molecule sort of approaches when you're talking about cannabinoids being CBD or THC, but there's also this collective approach from all the parts of the plant, and that's not just cannabinoids. You've also got terpenes and flavonoids. They're all constituents in the plant that work best if they're left in the whole plant as opposed to an extract. That said, though, from a pharmacopoeia point of view, extracts can work as well.
I just wanted to ask a question about that. Do you envisage in the future the ability for a doctor to prescribe seeds so that people may in fact grow their own, but specific plants or to treat specific ailments?
Well, I would think that there would be an ability to breed and the plants exist with various degrees of both THC and CBD. So in the case of industrial hemp, we have a very low THC content. That's why we're allowed to grow it under license. But the rule of thumb is you have a low THC, you have a reasonable content of CBD. And the opposite goes for marijuana cannabis, which is on the other end of the scale. So, yes,
the reason I bring it up is that a lot of people have talked about the whole plant, not just it in a particular form, like a pill or a oil, or because some people want access to the whole plant.
Yeah, as well as those extracts. So, yes, it would be possible to look at a plant and say, well, that has those ratios of cannabinoids in it, and those ratios have been found to be effective in that particular ailment or treatment. So why wouldn't you therefore say, well, okay, well, if you grew that true to form plant as a variety, then you would be able to satisfy that. So there's
Thank you.
That happens in America.
Yeah. Are there any, I mean, I know you could speak forever, but I'm just wondering if there are questions. Matt?
Thank you very much. In your submission section 2, you're talking about the CBD product, and I'm just not sure if I understand you right. You're concerned that classifying the CBD product could make hemp products illegal, but under this bill, walk me through that, because the bill is going to deschedule CBD.
Right.
So you think that's a risk, do you?
Well, yeah, the CBD was only put into the Misuse of Drugs Act regulations last year, so 2017, without consultation really. It just sort of snuck its way in there, and so it's there. And now what they're proposing in this amendment is to unwind that and take it out, which is great, because CBD is a red herring, folks. There's no need to consider CBD. The whole health organisations, there's lots of information around the fact that it's not, shouldn't be considered a controlled drug like THC because it doesn't have a psychoactive effect. Yeah. So our problem is that, okay, great, you're going to unwind CBD out of the Misuse of Drugs regulations and therefore out of the Act, but two things: why have it in there in the first place? So just take the whole thing out. Don't put it in a definition and say then it excludes CBD products, because we'll get to that in a moment. That's just, why have it in there? Just take it out. It is irrelevant to the whole proceedings. I mean, if MODA in 1975 was drafted, if they had looked at the United Nations Convention, for example, the 1961 Convention, which says in Section 28.2 that cannabis for horticultural and industrial purposes is okay, then we wouldn't have this situation, because they would have defined what the problem was, which is clearly the psychoactive substance THC. If they had done that, then all these other cannabinoids and everything would be irrelevant. The other issue that we've got, great that it is that CBD is going to be unwound out of by this amendment in the bill, it's still since 2011, it's still a prescribed medicine. So there's still a potential, therefore, to stymie us as an industry. And what that means is that we have, as we discussed, cannabinoids are naturally occurring in the plant. So CBD is going to be in the plant. Minimal amounts of THC is going to be in the plant, and low THC industrial hemp grown under licence issued by the Ministry of Health in New Zealand. So you're still going to have this potential whereby we have a hemp product which under our regulations is defined as any product in whole or in part extracted, processed from industrial hemp. So only industrial hemp can make hemp products. Only industrial hemp can be grown in New Zealand under licence issued by the Ministry of Health. So we've got a really nice little industry there. All it needs to be is enabled. And by that I mean the Ministry of Health turning around and saying, okay, well, instead of saying no to every product we come up with, they're going to start saying yes and enable us to get on with our industry. Now, if that happened, we could still be shot in the foot by the fact that then somebody turns around in Ministry of Health and says, oh, hold it, your CBD is a prescription medicine. So your hemp food products effectively become illegal overnight. And that's the sort of uncertainty that you can't make a business around. There's no business in the world that can put up with that sort of uncertainty. So without addressing those sort of issues, we're not going to be able to get the capital investment that we require to really move forward and achieve the economic benefits. Because you're already aware of the social and the health benefits. And I'm here to give you a little bit of a heads up to say that the economic benefits are phenomenal. And for us, it's the food and the fibre is really massive. And then you throw the medicinal into that as well, as you've seen from previous presentations. The numbers are really there. And then you would have the budget via taxes and levies and fees, etc., to fund the support that maybe some of these people have that are affected by it in an adverse way. You'd have the budget to do that, plus the budget to do many other things as well in the health area. So it's really a massive opportunity for New Zealand to go forward. The worldwide, again, as previous speakers have spoken to, the industry around the world is all moving forward. There's people taking advantage of it. Australia, the minister comes out in January this year saying, we want Australia to be leading the world in this new industry. Well, we could be doing the same thing if it's embraced by the government. The industry's going to embrace it. The patients are already embracing it, and they're not waiting, folks. They're not waiting for you guys to go through all of this. They're already underway. So, there's the economic potential, the environmental potential, the social and benefits would far outweigh any of the costs or potential negatives. And you could deal with those because now you've got a budget for them. So if we embrace it, we could have a worldwide industry. There's a lot of talented people in New Zealand that could really move it forward, and they're just waiting to get started.
Right. I think there aren't any further questions. It's a very good submission. Thank you. And I think what you've helped us understand actually is that we don't have, we have an industry and a very solid and thriving industry. And what we want collectively out of this piece of legislation, as you highlighted, is to enable that industry to take the next step. So
that's right. Yeah. So, and just in saying that, though, we have hemp products. So when you're defining the medicinal cannabis product, that's what you should be looking at rather than CBD as a product. It's medicinal cannabis products. And what we don't want is our industry that already exists and is just about to get started. I mean, the food legislation was voted on in April 2017, so that will happen this year for New Zealand. It's already happened in Australia, of course, but that's going to open up a whole, that's going to allow our industry to scale on the food side. So we're just about to get started, and then along comes medicinal cannabis products that has the potential, if it's not well worded, to affect the hemp products, which we already have and is a protected industry.
So you would like to be involved in the making of the regulations around this to make sure that you don't get captured by mistake?
Absolutely, and I think that a wide range of consultation is required to make these regulations workable, because you need the perspective of all the doctors and things, because all the stakeholders are going to be involved in the situation that you're going to be creating via this scheme. And if you don't take on board a wide range of consultation, you'll miss things and it won't be effective. And that speaks to the fact that you're limiting it to just the terminally ill, which I can understand the reasons for that. Let's do a subset and then see how that goes. And sure, but that's really, in the sense of your fear and compassion, you've missed the point there. That isn't fair. It is compassionate to the terminally ill, but guess what, folks? They're already doing it because they don't have time to wait for you to go through all this thing. That's the whole nature of being terminally ill. So for all the other people with chronic pain that don't meet sort of the categories of, to get prescriptions for an opioid-based medicine, how are they treating their pain? Well, they're going to that illicit market as well. So, if you're going to review this in 2 years, you're going to still have all these questions unanswered in 2 years because you haven't gone through the process of allowing a wider range of potential patients to be involved. So you haven't considered or been exposed to the situations that you need to collate that information to get the answers such that in 2 years, then you can really sit down and have a look. Is this scheme working? How can it better work? Have we gone too far? Have we not gone far enough? But without that ability to have a wide range, you've missed that opportunity, and that's an important part to consider because your fear and compassion come into that. The other part of your safety and your quality, well, that's why stakeholder consultation is required, because we as the industry want to work with the patients. We want to respect what the patients need. We don't want to be putting out product that is going to compromise their health at all. On the safety side, medicinal cannabis is a very safe product to be using. No therapeutic, no deaths by medicinal cannabis have been reported. So you've got to, you're underway with that straight off the bat. That's a good starting point. But you've really got some issues around quality. So people do have had adverse effects to medicinal cannabis, but it wasn't the cannabis so much. It was maybe a chemical they used in the growing of that medicinal cannabis. So you've got to watch that, and that's on the quality side. So you need the stakeholders, and you need to widen it up as well, not just the New Zealand experience, but learn from what's happening overseas.
We have a question for you.
Oh yes, sorry.
I just want to come back to the question that Matt raised. It's relevant to the discussion you're just having, and it's that statement. Our concern is that as hemp products may contain CBD, they may be classified as a CBD product. What proportion of CBD might be in a standard hemp product?
Well, it's a naturally recurring. Yeah. Well, it would vary on the variety that you're dealing with. So, excellent question, and I'd love to be able to tell you. In New Zealand, of the 12 approved hemp varieties, these are the CBD limits. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of CBD testing in the country. It's only just started to happen. So, that information will be available, but it could be, in the low percentages. It's not going to be 30 or 40%.
Right, so that's sort of the sense I was wanting to get. So what you're saying to me is of the current hemp products at the moment, you don't know because it's hard to test what the CBD component is, but you suspect it's in the low 30s, is that?
No, low 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s. Some plants may contain a little bit more, but when it's treated as a medicine, then it comes under your medicinal scheme.
Yeah, that's the point you're making, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't focus on the CBD part because it draws us into this sort of bill.
Exactly, when it's a red herring. And, we've got plenty of scope within there because unless you're making medicinal claims, you're left as a food or a nutrient or a supplement or a herbal remedy, those sort of things.
And that's where you want to stay?
Well, clearly.
Yeah. Okay, good, thank you.
We can ask the Ministry for the approved varieties, what their concentrations are. Thank you very much.
They wouldn't know either. But
well, they should if they've approved varieties for you to be able to grow.
Sorry, I'd take exception to that in the fact that it's only really about low THC. That's what they're trying to control. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but that would be what I'd be interested in, what the THC component.
Oh, okay. Well, it's all under 0.3%.
All under 0.3. Well, that's a different answer to that question.
No, that's the THC though.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah, but that's the THC.
Right, so we can only grow low industrial hemp THC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Lovely. Now we're going back to. Oh, he's here. Are you there, John? Kia ora. That submission is complete.
Thank you.
Actually, well over time. Kia ora, John. How are you? It's Laura Sewell here from the Health Select Committee.
Very well. How are you?
Good. I'll just let my colleagues introduce themselves, and then we have 15 minutes for your submission, please.
Hi, Dr.
Okay,
Shane.
thank you.
Dr. Shane Reddy, National MP, Whangarei.
Nikki Wagner, National MP from Christchurch.
Matt Ducey, National MP, Waimakariri.
Angie Warren-Clark, Labour List MP, based in the Bay of Plenty.
Kia ora, Anahila, Labour List MP, based at Papakura in Auckland.
Liz Craig, Labour List MP, based in Invercargill.
So we're in your hands, Dr. Alchin, thank you very much for making a submission.
Okay, look, thanks very much, everyone, and thanks to the Health Select Committee for making time to hear me. Very grateful. Look, first of all, I'm presenting on behalf of the New Zealand Pain Society, of which I'm the current elected voluntary president. Like you lot, I'm on the public payroll. I'm employed 4 days a week at the Pain Management Centre Burwood Hospital, where I'm a pain medicine specialist, and I'm employed 1 day a week by the University of Tadgh Medical School in Christchurch, where I work as an academic at the Department of Orthopaedic Surgery and Musculoskeletal Medicine. So, though I have no financial conflicts here, I do have some conflicts of interest to declare. First of all, I'm passionately interested in evidence-based medicine, the role and the application of science to patient care. Secondly, I'm passionately interested in chronic pain and best evidence-based care for patients with pain. Okay, now what I thought I'd do is make a few comments generally about the bill that's before Parliament that you're meeting about. Then I'd like to make a few comments more generally about cannabinoids for pain. And then thirdly, hopefully have some time for questions and discussion, and if any of you have got questions. So first of all, as far as the bill that's currently before Parliament that you're meeting to discuss, the first aim of that, which is to make an exception in statutory defence for terminally ill people in the last year of life to possess and use cannabis. Now, the position of the Pain Society on that is that we oppose that proposal for several reasons. First of all, the assumption there is false. The assumption is that cannabinoids actually have evidence of efficacy for terminal pain. Now, that's actually not there. There is no evidence or insufficient evidence to justify the use of cannabinoids for patients with terminal pain. Second point about that first clause is that, as I understand from colleagues in palliative care, it's in fact very difficult to define who's in the last 12 months of life and who isn't. Doctors are notoriously bad at guessing who's going to survive and for how long. There may be issues where people now want, in order to get access to medicinal or so-called medicinal cannabinoids, may pressure their doctors into being declared terminal. The third problem we have with that first part of the bill is that we think that patients with terminal illness are a particularly vulnerable group of patients. We don't think they should have lower standards of care. We don't think that exceptions should be made for them where we waive normal standards of medical care by allowing in non-established so-on forms of treatment. Now, the second provision of the bill, which is provides for regulation-making power, so if you can set standards of products that are manufactured, imported, and supplied, we support that. Any medicinal agent that's going to be given by a doctor should be a pharmaceutical grade. So we fully support that. There should be a mechanism, a legislative framework that allows for standardisation and quality control of medicines that are introduced to the market. So we fully support that. The third provision of the bill is to amend Schedule 2 of the Act so that cannabidiol and cannabidiol products are no longer classed as controlled drugs. Again, we support that. The evidence on cannabidiol, the accepted view is that it has no psychoactive function, no mind-altering and so on actions, and it should be removed from the list of scheduled drugs. So we fully support that. In fact, a colleague I work with at Pain Management Centre Burwood Hospital, she's recently returned from the UK, and she tells me that you can walk into health food shops in the UK and buy cannabidiol oil in a health food shop. And I don't see any reason why that shouldn't apply here. I don't see why cannabidiol should not be available. Now, that's not getting doctors to prescribe it. That's allowing people to walk into a shop and buy it. Okay, so that's our comments on the actual bill that you're considering. So you also have a 2.5 or 3 page submission that we've made, and I just made a few comments on that. I guess the first point is that we feel it's really, and not just us, medical journals have repeatedly made the point, we need to clearly distinguish between, on the one hand, the issue of legalisation or decriminalisation of the recreational use of cannabis. That's one question. Now, that's not a question that the New Zealand Pain Society has a position on. I have a personal position on that, which is that I think it should be made available with tight controls of supply to minimise harm. But this is a social question. It's not a medical question. This is a social question. But that has to be distinguished very carefully and clearly from another question, which is, what is the role of cannabinoids for medical conditions prescribable by doctors? Now, this is totally different. This is not a social question. This is not a question for the political process. This is a question for normal procedures, technocrats to decide according to normal procedures and so on. I've given you my submission an analogy. The analogy is in aviation. So the question of what are the standards of aviation safety, who designs aircraft, who sets the standards for maintenance of aircraft, who decides what sort of pilot certification and training are required. These are questions of technical expertise. They're not questions for the public domain. Whether a pilot with epilepsy can be allowed to continue flying is not something I would expect Parliament to pass legislation on. That's a question for civil aviation to decide. And similarly, when it comes to cannabinoids for medicine, that's not a question that Parliament should be passing legislation on. That's a question for the normal processes in society to deal with. So the health department and Pharma Cann and everything else like that. Okay, so that's the comment on. We have to carefully distinguish those two things. Our fear and the fear of many doctors is that we are at risk of medicalising a social problem. It's happened before in other issues, and it looks like it's happening here. People who are pushing for decriminalisation, legalisation of recreational cannabis, look at so-called medicinal cannabis as a halfway house, as a step on the way to that. We'll get doctors to decide who can have cannabis or not. Now, that's if society wants recreational cannabis, let Parliament vote on that, but don't try to slide in recreational cannabis under the guise of medicinal cannabis. This is a totally different thing. And that has to be guided, the use of medicinal cannabinoids has to be guided by medical evidence, not by legislature through Parliament.
You ready for some
okay,
questions?
So,
Dr. Alton? Ready for some questions? Yes, you are. I'm going to start, actually. Have any of the people that you treat ever asked you to be part of a trial? And would you be interested in being part of a trial that tests whether or not a cannabis product would be suitable?
A lot of patients we see are on cannabis, like a lot of patients we see take alcohol for their pain. No one has actually asked to be part of a trial, but they just wonder whether they can use it. But to set up a trial is very expensive. Our success at getting trials going is pretty low, the costing required and so on. But yeah, I think that's the whole thing. Clinical trials are the way to go, to accumulate an evidence base. So good question, thank you.
Right. Dr. Shane Reti.
Thank you, John. I want to understand what seems to me as two sides of the argument as you've presented it. First of all, you state currently there is not the scientific evidence of sufficient quality to enable any cannabinoid to be registered as a medicine. But then in the same breath I hear you say, but you're happy for cannabidiol to be removed from the schedule. Can you help me understand those two sides, please?
Yeah, cannabidiol, I think I've missed out a word in the thing that you read out just then, for medicine in pain. So it's really for pain I'm talking about. There are indications for cannabinoids in some other medical conditions. So THC is approved by the US FDA for age-related wasting and also for chemotherapy-related nausea and vomiting. And there have been two recent RCTs in the last 12 months, which have found pretty good evidence for cannabidiol for two forms of rare, severe pediatric epilepsy. And it may be that the cannabidiol will be approved for those. Now, coming back to your question about, I personally don't think the cannabidiol should be on any sort of register. I mean, it's pretty harmless. It should, well, of course, it's side effects, but it should probably just be made available in pharmacies or health food shops as a supplement. I don't see why it should be on a schedule of restricted drugs. So I agree with the bill in that sense.
So in your submission where you've said cannabinoids shouldn't be registered as a medicine, quote, for any indication, you're wanting to change that and qualify it for chronic pain.
I sent through, it was obviously hasn't made it through, but I sent through, I realised after I'd submitted it late at night, on the last night available, that I omitted the word for pain at the end of that for any medical indication, for pain. I sent through that, but it hasn't made it through. But yes, I certainly want to qualify that as for pain. So I'm addressing it, indications for pain. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Matt.
What's his name again? Sorry, what's his name?
His name's John.
John. Oh, hi, John. Matt Ducey here. Thank you for your submission. I think you have a voice that is helpful in this whole mix. Now, when you challenge the idea of efficacy and base it on maybe the lack of clinical data, I'm paraphrasing you quite a bit here.
Yes.
I mean, I actually asked that question to some researchers, and it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? Because then they quickly come back and say, well, you're talking about an illegal product, so how can we build evidence on it? Would you accept that's a fair retort to that assumption you make?
Look, thank you, Matt. It certainly is a fair retort.
Yeah.
And I'll give you some examples. In 2013, the US government allowed trials of CBD. Until 2013, you couldn't even do trials in the US, which is the home of most medical research in the world. Okay? You couldn't do it because it was illegal. But in 2013, the US government removed cannabidiol and from the list of medications or substances you couldn't do research on, and they approved research. And the result of that, Matt, has been two things. There's publication of the two studies, one in 2017 and one in 2018, on cannabidiol for severe childhood epilepsy. So you're absolutely correct. And the next step for that was in 2015, a wonderful brain researcher called Nora Volkow in the US, who heads one of the National Institutes of Health research bodies. She went to Capitol Hill in the US and spoke to Congress and Senate and asked them to remove THC similarly from the list so that they can get on and do some studies. So you're absolutely correct, Matt. Fully agree with you. That scientists have to be able to do studies on this. So the stuff has to be legalised to the extent that people can do reasonable research. Absolutely.
And I've been told to only limit myself to one more question, unfortunately. The question I'd like to ask you is around quotation, what works, in the quotations, around, the question of efficacy. Well, if a patient's self-reporting, they're getting some value from it, surely that's good enough?
Not for science. No, that's not the way medicine works. There's all sorts of things compound the picture there. One is that there's placebo response. The second thing is, and no one wants to mention this, but there's a thing called substance use disorder, which used to go by the name of addiction.
Yep.
And one form of that is cannabis use disorder. There's a diagnosable psychiatric disease where people are addicted to cannabis. Now, these people have cannabis, of course they're going to feel better. If you're an alcoholic and you have alcohol, you feel better. If you're an opioid addict and you have an opioid, you feel better. So, but that's an argument, A, for treating addictions, B, for people having access to their drug of choice. So, for example, you can get alcohol legally. That's an argument not for doctors prescribing it, because that's not the sort of level of evidence that doctors need to prescribe an opioid. Any medication, including cannabis. You need randomized trial evidence. So, for example, in the US, again, the biggest source of our information on this, US Food and Drug Administration require 2 good quality randomized controlled trials of a drug to find that it's effective before it will gain FDA approval for use in that indication. That's not about whether an individual report says that it works or someone's stepmother says that it works or whatever. It's randomized control evidence. That simply is internationally the way medicine works. That's the way evidence-based medicine works. Short of that, we're back to sort of homeopathy and, pre-modern medicine. And if people want to do that, that's fine. But let's recognise that and let's make it legally available for them. So if people want to treat it, their cannabis, they can go and buy some stuff and treat. Just like people now who find their pain responds to alcohol, they don't go to their doctor to get a prescription for alcohol. They go and they buy the stuff at the supermarket and they self-medicate with alcohol if they find that's useful. So the point you're making there, Matt, is an argument for making cannabis legal, but it's not an argument for making it a prescription medication. That the standards of evidence required are quite distinct.
Thank you. That was good clarification.
Last question from Dr. Liz Craig.
Actually, mine was probably asking Matt's question in a slightly different way, but the same response, I suspect. Just because you've provided this Annals of Internal Medicine article where it talks about 27 chronic pain trials and them finding low strength of evidence that cannabis actually alleviates neuropathic pain and insufficient evidence of other pain populations. And then contrasting that with the number of people that have come in over the last week saying that cannabis is transforming my life in terms of pain. So it's just a question of how that sort of contrast. What's your take on that? I mean, I think you've highlighted most of the points, but
good question, Liz. And as you say, that's similar to Matt's second question there. Again, people report all sorts of things. So for example, the Annals of Internal Medicine article, which I'm delighted to see you looked at, well done. But that article there talks, for example, about lists of side effects, and I think that's the paper. But they look at something like 89% of people on cannabinoids reported a side effect, but something like 60% of people on the placebo reported a side effect. Now this is extraordinary. The people reporting symptoms or alleviation of symptoms is not always an effect of the pharmacological agent. People report side effects on placebo tablets very commonly, and people report improvements on placebos as well. So an individual reporting an improvement on a medication or reporting side effects on a medication does not mean that those improvements or adverse effects, so-called, are actually pharmacological effects. They may be either placebo or nocebo effects. In other words, the person's psyche is active there. But to prescribe a medication internationally, including New Zealand, every advanced country in the world, requires good clinical trial evidence, not for an individual report. Again, that's a good ground for making this stuff legally available if they want to use it themselves. But don't ask a doctor to prescribe something that does not have scientific rationale and basis sufficient to compel or convince, say, the US Food and Drug Administration that this is an effective medication for this indication. And Liz, you made another good point, and thanks for raising that. the Annals of Internal Medicine article review did find there was weak evidence, but it was only in neuropathic pain. In other forms of pain, there was no evidence. And this is what we commonly see. 4 days a week, I work in the pain management centre. We don't see all that many cases of neuropathic pain. What we see is chronic musculoskeletal pain, chronic low back pain, chronic neck pain, fibromyalgia. Now, that Annals of Internal Medicine article points out that there's no evidence for cannabis in those conditions. And yet that's what we're asked to treat. All for chronic visceral pain, abdominal pain, pelvic pain, chest pain, things like that. So there's a lack of evidence, not even weak evidence, as there is for neuropathic pain, not even weak evidence for most of the pain conditions we see in a chronic pain service.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate your submission.
That's fine. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Next, we have Cannabis Care. I haven't got your name, sorry.
Kia ora, I'm Graham Gulbranson. I'm a doctor in Auckland. I've got some supplementary papers to hand around and...
Sarah, Pakita, someone more. Lovely.
And a special one for Shane, I hope he shows his
Thank you.
That's really nice.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And we're ready for you. We're not waiting for Shane.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for having me here. I'm a prescribing GP, so I think I bring a particular perspective to this select committee meeting. Medicinal cannabis gives hope for many patients. It changes lives for the better, and we request your help to remove barriers to care. To begin, I wish to tautoko the medicinal cannabis users who've shared their stories, and really those who are too sick to attend the select committee hearings. Greetings to all the supporters out there who are watching online, and remembering those who've been prosecuted for medicinal cannabis and those who suffer because they can't access medicinal cannabis. Tēnā koe Louisa, Chair. I'm asking you to be fearless and far-sighted in your recommendations on this bill. And tēnā koe Shane, you were the first recipient of the New Zealand Dr. Buzz Lightyear Award for your good work. I'm the most recent recipient for my 6-year campaign to get funding for methadone patients seen in primary care. The hospitals got the money and kept the money. They called it shared care. GPs did the work and got none of it. So that was quite an effort. I hope I'm not back here in 6 years making the same arguments today with medicinal cannabis. Tēnā koutou katoa. So I've been a GP for 35 years. I am a qualified addiction specialist for the last 10 years. And in my work, I find that cannabis users often take it to help with pain, help with sleep, help with anxiety. I've prescribed medicinal cannabis for the last year through my organisation, Cannabis Care New Zealand Limited. My submission focuses on what it's like to be a GP prescribing. Really to address some of the concerns, I'll just tell you what I tell GPs when I'm lecturing and when I tell my patients, that cannabis can be divided into adult or recreational use. That's where there's abundant THC. If you want the euphoric effects, the feeling of existential well-being, then you want lots of THC. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about down this end. So the plants that make more of the CBD, and that's what we can prescribe at the moment. But actually plants make the whole range of cannabinoids and other chemicals. In the middle, we've got a mix of THC and CBD, and that's where the real power lies. So right now I can prescribe CBD. With a specialist, I can prescribe Sativex or mixes with THC and CBD, potent herbal medicine, but we're not talking about people getting stoned, running the risk of psychosis, children use, which is where the THC comes in. So that's kind of a basic point to start with. In front of you, you've got my recommendations, and I want to start with them. That's the loose page just inside. And so I'll just go through those recommendations. Really, they come from the basis of me having seen 104 patients in the last year. I'm the leading prescriber in Australasia. And so my first recommendation is that CBD be descheduled and similar agents to CBD. Number two, abolish Ministry of Health application forms, and I'm going to talk about how unnecessary and time-consuming they are, or if they can't be abolished, allow all vocationally registered doctors, not just specialists. Actually, GPs are specialists, and we know more about our patients, and we're more likely to know about medicinal cannabis. I think all vocationally registered doctors should be allowed to prescribe all combinations of THC and CBD, and I use the grounds medical necessity. I think patients and their doctors can work out what's appropriate without a list of restricted guidelines like terminal care or chronic pain or so on. Each year we're going to hear more and more conditions added to what is actually working. The evidence, there's a huge evidence for medicinal cannabis. My fourth recommendation is to allow the promotion of cannabis products, and the law doesn't allow that at the moment. So how do pharmacies, how do doctors, how do patients know if Section 29 and Section 20 restrict the advertising of medicinal cannabis? And really that's all part of educating doctors. That's an important part of it. And we need to reduce the cost, and I think that means supporting a local industry. If you go to the front page of the supplement, you are the first people to see my analysis of the 100 patients that I've seen this year. And what we've got at the top there is, of those people, most of them self-refer, many, a few are referred by their GPs. 60% of them have come in to see me because of pain. Often it's severe pain that's gone on for years and decades, hasn't got better with conventional medicine. And then I've mentioned cancer, neurological conditions, psychological distress, about 13% each of these self-referred patients to my clinic. And over Easter and Anzac Day, I contacted 60 of these patients who've been using CBD oil for at least the past month. And what I found was that the risk of side effects I thought was very low, 5 out of 60. Mainly sleep disturbance, vivid dreams, and we've adjusted the dose and dealt with that. Pretty minor side effects, really, and a lot of people appreciate the increased sleep from CBD. But look, the good news is that 40% of patients tell me they got very good to excellent effects from CBD. And of the chronic pain patients, 85% of them tell me that they got at least some benefit, and many of them excellent benefit from legal prescribed CBD. 20% report some good results, 40% say that really the CBD did not help them, and I recommend that these people have easy access to combinations with CBD and THC. So when I see patients, they arrive usually in a distressed state. Firstly, their symptoms cause distress, the chronic pain, the anxiety, the sleeplessness. Secondly, the medications they've tried have often caused distress. Strong medications can have nasty side effects, and often they don't work. Thirdly, doctors have added to the distress. Patients tell me over and over, I've been to my doctor, they don't believe that CBD is legal, or they haven't heard of it, or they don't know how to prescribe it, or they've been to the pain specialist, and the pain specialist says there isn't enough evidence. Well, they haven't looked. I went to a 4-day course in Melbourne last year. I've been to other courses. There are thousands of medical articles that give good evidence, but actually listen to the patients. I've just said that 40% of my chronic pain patients are experiencing benefit. We need to be guided by what our patients tell us. And I'm mentioning the levels of distress. Fourthly, the legal distress. People going to drug dealers to get their medicine. Scary stuff. Taking illegal drugs home with the risk of prosecution. So a difficult situation. I need to talk to people about all of these aspects before I actually get into the consultation. And in my consultation, I do a standard thing, read the reports, read the occasional referral letter. But the barriers in the consultation, this is where I'd like to draw your attention.
Graham, can I just say, if you want questions, it'd be good if you wrapped up soon. We've got 2. Sure. But yeah, I'm aware that I actually haven't been keeping us to schedule. So you've almost taken up your entire time.
Thank you, Louisa. My own timing suggests that I've got a few more minutes.
Well, that's why I'm asking you.
Yes.
We've got 2 people who have indicated they would like to ask you a question.
Hey, look, some of the barriers, and you've got them in the supplement there, that to get something stronger with CBD and THC, you need to see a specialist. That's expensive. Specialists don't know about it. Setting it up in the computer requires special entries in the database. In your supplement, you've got a copy of the triplicate form that's required for CBD. Unnecessary, really, for something that is as safe as this. In fact, in my experience, all medicinal cannabis is far safer than a lot of the standard medication. And when you go to a specialist, if you want the Tilray products, I've given you a copy of the 4-page form for approval that has to be filled out and go to the ministry. For Sativex, the barrier is $950 for 3 little bottles, but that also requires a 6-page form that needs to be filled out by me or the specialist. It needs to go to the Ministry of Health for approval. It can take up to several weeks before we get a response. There are so many barriers. I think we need to take those away, allow all registered medical practitioners to prescribe all grades of CBD THC mix because it is such a safe, effective medicine. This is what my patients tell me. This is what the research tells me.
Great. Dr. Shane Reti and then Anahila, and then that's it.
Tēnā koe, Graham. Thank you for your presentation. Good to see you. I just wanted to comment that the bill as it reads requires a doctor's intervention to certify someone as terminal, and we know the difficulties with that. I wanted to just put that to the side. Other than that is the only medical practitioner engagement with this bill. International jurisdictions also require a medical practitioner to say that they are likely to benefit, that the patient is likely to benefit from cannabis or cannabis products. This bill is absent in that space, and you've just also pointed out, as others have, as we talked to increasing the scope, that you see a lot of people with chronic pain. Is that the way to increase the scope, by saying is likely to benefit from cannabis products as recommended by a medical practitioner? It seems to me that's a gap in the bill, but I'd like to get your view on that.
I prefer the term medical necessity, and I think that's a situation where patients come with information, the doctor has information, we put it together, and I have to ask my patients what cannabis products they're using. And if someone comes and says, my child's seizures are reduced because of this hemp extract, then I need to listen to that. So I use the term medical necessity. In terms of the final year of life, I saw someone yesterday who said, look, the pain is so bad, many times I wish I could be dead. That's not what we're talking about, but it's the wrong question, really. I think we need to trust doctors and patients in the privacy of a consultation room to come to the right decision for that patient.
Okay, thank you, Graham.
Oh, tēnā koe. I don't have a question, it's a comment. I want to thank you for the evidence that you provided. And probably a challenge to anyone there who's looking at the research, in terms of the 6-page form, I just want to put it that perhaps these forms that have already been prescribed and filled can provide evidence in itself, because it is 6-page, and it's easy. What we've heard in some submitters to say that doctors can prescribe, they're not prescribing. Well, thank you for bringing in the barriers. If doctors have to fill in a 6-page form and then having promotions that they're unable to promote the medical cannabis products, then those are the barriers which actually answers some of the questions that the submitters have had frustrations with doctors not prescribing. So I just want to thank you for your very insightful submission.
Yes, I think we could probably do more direct evidence gathering.
Yeah.
I think the form is really kind of a legal thing to cover legal stuff.
Yeah.
To do proper research, there are people in this room who can help with that.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Good.
Here from Ligar Ltd Partnership. Hello, Nigel. Welcome to the Health Select Committee. So we have your submission before us.
So, as a brief introduction to Ligar, we're a polymer chemicals company based in Hamilton, 16 people, but with kind of global collaborations around product development. And what we make is systems that separate out specific molecules, and they can be taints or toxins, or in this case, high-value molecules. So what we're developing, and we've been developing over the past couple of years, is polymers and systems for separating out, starting with CBD from hemp, but the intent is to move to systems that separate out individual cannabinoids. So we're looking way beyond CBD to being able to separate the cannabinoids so they can then be reformulated. So we're firm believers in the entourage effect and putting everything together. Also firm believers in, if we're going to have these prescribed, then we need to have them in their set amounts. So rather than letting the randomness of the plant deal with it, although taking the plant itself is a good thing, being able to prescribe, we need to be able to mix the medicines according to the conditions. So that's what we're aiming to achieve. Now, our submission is mostly focused on just practicalities, so rather than saying cannabis is good or bad, we're just looking at the need for a supportive legal structure, so something is logical, factual and practical that we can follow. We want to abide with the laws, but we need the laws to be practical. And so our focus is on actually just putting all of the controls and focus on THC while allowing the freedom for the other cannabinoids to be within their appropriate parts of legislation. So if they're going to be medicines, but in the Medicines Act, if we're talking about them within foods, then allow them to be treated by the appropriate acts. So within the structure of the submission, we went through some just inconsistencies or logical fallacies, and I'm just going to touch on those. And the first one is just the method by which CBD is being included in the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is by calling it an isomer. So this is the Ministry of Health position saying it's an isomer. And yes, in one sense it is, but it's also a sense that if you applied it to other products, it makes a nonsense of it. So for example, progesterone is a structural isomer of THC. Progesterone is the pregnancy hormone, and you can have it prescribed. You can buy it over the counter. And so, or if you took an example where a pipitine is a structural isomer of opioids, now of morphine, but that's a nutritional supplement. So the mechanism by which CBD has been included in the Misuse of Drugs Act is, we believe, a false mechanism. So just applying logic there around what an actual isomer would mean, in this case a stereoisomer, it just would automatically fall out of the regulations. Second point is just the definition of the CBD product that's being used here. By defining a specific CBD product, you're also excluding the other cannabinoids specifically, so saying we're going to allow that. It's excluding the others, and also saying that 2%, the 2% that's allowed would be contaminants, which would be the other cannabinoids. Well, why are we worried about whether that 2% is made up of other cannabinoids other than THC? If we're actually concerned about THC, let's just regulate for THC. If you're going to pick a percentage of the 2% and pick that for 2% THC, not the other things, because we don't have concern about the other cannabinoids or the terpenes or whatever else that's in there. Now, the other issue with that definition of the CBD product and the use of the other cannabinoids. Now, we're looking at, for example, CBG or CBN and having those as products. While they're not currently listed within the Misuse of Drugs Act specifically, they are caught under the classification of the cannabis preparation. So within the Act, there's this thing called cannabis preparation. So any part of the cannabis plant that's used would be considered an illegal substance under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So while we're specifically excluding CBD product and making a product out of that, we're not including the other cannabinoids. As they're not of concern, I think we need to make explicit statements that say we're not worried about the other cannabinoids, the only thing we're worried about is THC. So we would prefer something that points us towards a professional industry where we're preparing products under specific requirements, so good manufacturing practice or pharmacopoeia practices, and saying push the restriction down there, and then also saying, well, we can only use, at least in the early stages, only use industrial hemp as the source material for these products. Industrial hemp already has, as we discussed earlier on, the maximum limit of 0.35% THC. So that in itself is a self-limiting factor in terms of what THC could creep in there. So just specifying you can only use that as your source material is a safety factor. Then subsequently measuring the THC and only measuring the THC in the product gives us a much easier way of monitoring what the product is and regulating those products. I guess the final point really is on export. We mentioned this earlier on. We believe that there's a potential for a significant industry for New Zealand here, but only going to be significant if we can allow for export, and it's a simple inclusion to allow for export. It's then determining what we can and can't export is the question. We believe we can get to whatever quality standard is set in terms of maybe the CBD, the THC content, but without that explicit statement of being able to export, we won't be able to invest significantly in growing the New Zealand industry. That's me.
Great, thank you. Some questions? Angie, and then Matt.
Thank you for your presentation. I actually Googled what is an isomer. It was very helpful.
I'm no scientist, so
yeah,
too.
I kind of knew I should. I'm interested in your definition of incurable versus chronic pain that you talk about in terms of who should be able to access. So certainly in sitting through the number of submissions I have come across, incurable is, this is the first time I've come across incurable. Can you just sort of have a little chat about why you would use that definition?
Good, but I'm not the specialist in that field. It's part of the submission, but I'm not a GP or a specialist on that, so I'm better not making a specific comment on that. It's not my area of expertise.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Nigel, Matt.
Thanks, Madam Chair. A very technical submission.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to wake up dreaming of isomers and
Googling
compounds tonight. Points 26 and 27. So
you're getting into the nuts and bolts of the scheme, you're talking about the process needing to be developed in what I thought was a good term, an emerging industry, and you're talking about the licences. So ideally, you would like to see a set limit of So help me understand that. So licences basically would determine who the main players in this emerging industry are.
Yeah, and I guess our preference is not to, but it's one way, and I think it's the way that other jurisdictions have taken to manage the load on the legislators to monitor who's doing what.
Yeah.
So bearing in mind you're starting from nothing, and if you've got everyone out there producing, it ends up as being a massive bottleneck because you don't have all the people in place to go and monitor, make sure everyone's doing what they say they're doing.
Yeah.
So one way of managing that is to have a limited number of people so that government, our regulators and industry can both learn and grow at the same time.
Yeah.
The other is just to end up both. There's swings and roundabouts on both.
In your experience, is there any example of a jurisdiction where actually the state is the supplier? Because it just occurs to me, without any detail, we're making an assumption that actually there'll be an ability for the sector to gain licences and be the supplier. In fact, quite easily, this regulatory scheme could be rolled out and it could be the state.
It could be, but someone's got to be producing on behalf of the state. So the question is the state prepared to...
But not technically. The state could actually grow its own, couldn't it?
It could.
Yeah.
It could.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That wouldn't apply to, I believe, any other medicinal plants.
Yeah. I just find it interesting that time and time again, submitters are coming like yourself to say you've had no consultation. There's nothing in this bill to say what the scheme will look like, and ultimately it could land where the state's actually growing its own. Could cut out the whole sector.
We'll talk about the prisons growing them.
I mean,
yeah.
Say it doesn't apply anywhere else, and you'd probably question, are they the best people to be doing it?
Well,
and they'll probably subcontract that out to companies anyway.
I'm not advocating it, but if we see a budget line in May...
you'll be going. Yeah, we want those records.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just posing that question.
Go for it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel. Very good submission. Appreciate that. We now have Daniel from Sea Change Medical. Oh, he hasn't made it? Oh, okay. So next is Pharma Cann New Zealand, Chris Fowley. And I saw you shaking your head a few times, so no. So I don't know whether you want to clarify anything as you go along to help educate us.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to present today and for having these hearings. This is a very complex area, and I do appreciate that there's a lot in the bill that we simply don't know about, and that there's obviously a wider medical cannabis access scheme that's in play here. We have made some recommendations in our submission that relate to the wider aspects of the bill, and that's because we think they need to be taken into account. But if I could just step back and introduce myself, my name is Chris Fowley. I've been involved in cannabis policy for about 25 years. I've been in the hemp industry for over 20 years. And in that time, I've met hundreds and hundreds of patients. I've appeared as expert witness in court. I've travelled all around the world and met all the main players in the industry, gone to all the countries that have gone before us and done this already, and met with regulators, met with people who have founded the industry, met with people who have run testing labs, all of that. So I'm very pleased to be here today. And I do also want to acknowledge that on Monday you listened to the patients submitting. I think that was really important. I hope that was really useful and informative. It's something that I get every day, people calling me up in similar situations that are really heartbreaking with what people are going through. So we do strongly support the intent of the bill. As I say, we've made a few suggestions on how it can be improved. We put that at the front of the submission, page 2. We've got 18 recommendations. Most of them, we have concentrated on the standards because that's what directly relates to the industry. And Pharma Cann intends to apply for licenses to become a licensed producer here in New Zealand. We believe that that's the best way to bring down costs and make products affordable. It's the importation within the controlled drug international framework that creates unnecessary costs. And we see that with things like Sativex and Tilray that are more expensive here than where they're produced. And so by producing locally, we're really confident we can bring those costs right down and do that to a standard that's just as good as anything available around the world. We also, as a second part of our business, we're developing a portal to take prescribers and pharmacists through the process because we've identified that that is very difficult. There are doctors like Graham Goldbranson, who you've just heard from, who have very deep knowledge of it, and even he finds it quite cumbersome and time-consuming to go through the process. And so we're building a site that will automate much of that for the doctors, presenting only products that meet the standards applicable to New Zealand, and making sure they comply with everything they need to by automating those. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Our main thing is, well, we take hope and confidence that the Clause 7 of the bill, which is allowing the new power to create regulations around standards, that the assumption behind that, it's not expressly said in the bill, but there's an assumption there that these standards will be different to what we have right now. And that's crucial because what we have right now is the pharmaceutical system, and that system of approving products and developing products that has failed in this instance, and we can see that because we don't have anything. We have a Sativex that is possibly 100 times more expensive than what it should actually be going for in terms of the amount of cannabinoids that are in it, and it isn't even approved in the country that it's made. Right? Sativex is made in England, 20 years and hundreds of millions of pounds of development. It is still not approved in England. It's approved in New Zealand, the first country in the world to approve it, because we bent the rules for it, not because it met the typical pharmaceutical standards. The same with Tilray that we have now too. We've treated them differently. Same with Sativex being approved in Canada. It was treated differently to other pharmaceuticals. If we do a standard pharmaceutical approach to a plant like cannabis that you can't take patents out on, or certainly not in a way that you can wrap it all up and justify that kind of investment, then it simply doesn't happen. And that's what we've seen already here in New Zealand. The market or the pharmaceutical model is broken when it comes to cannabis. It isn't able to provide it. Having said that, doctors want the confidence to prescribe products. They want to know that it's gone through clinical trials. So this is why we're advocating a dual approach or a two-tier approach. And this is very common in a lot of countries overseas, where you have those pharmaceutical products that the doctors can prescribe, and then you also have another set of what we would call food grade or herbal supplement products. And a doctor may well recommend a patient go down to the pharmacy and get some, but they wouldn't write a prescription for it. And that's quite a big difference. They wouldn't necessarily have to go through all the approvals process, but they could still recommend their patient has it. They're still doing it under their care. And because the product itself wouldn't have gone through all those expensive clinical trials and things, the cost can be a lot cheaper. And this is the case in Canada. It's the case in over half the states in America. It's the case throughout Europe. It seems to just be here in Australia that is sticking, or so far, sticking to a strict pharmaceutical approach. But as I say, we have hope because of this provision in the bill that at least there will be an opportunity there that we can produce products to what we would still envisage doing a GMP grade production because we want to produce it to the highest standards possible. We want it to be safe. We want it to be tested. But there needs to be recognition that this isn't a pharmaceutical drug, that we need to come up with a new way of regulating it. But as I say, this is not unusual. If you think about many things out there, you have a pharmaceutical version and a health supplement version. This is quite common with other things. If you look on page 3, we have a mock-up of our first proposed product that we have under development, Satinol. If that was done as a herbal supplement, a herbal remedy, food grade, we could have that produced within 6 months. That could be on the market by the end of this year if the regulations happen quickly. We could have that out, produced and made. If it's a pharmaceutical standard and it involves clinical trials, we could still be talking about it in 10 years. And that doesn't really help anyone. This is the route they've gone down in Australia. They have a 3-year head start on us. It hasn't benefited patients at all. You have about 27 companies on the stock exchange that have all made lots of money for the people that founded them and the people that came along and invested. They haven't got any products to market in 3 years' time, and they haven't helped any patients. So I think we need to have a little bit of caution when we look to Australia for all options. I know we need to be consistent and harmonised, but I think it would really be worth looking at Canada and Europe at some of the ways that they're regulating products at a herbal level. On the next page, page 4, we have a shot of inside of a greenhouse. This is the supplier that we're talking to. They're based in Colorado. They develop these secure greenhouses. They're totally sealed. Nothing gets in or out. What I'd like to emphasise there is whether the final product is a pharmaceutical grade or a herbal supplement grade, it will be produced in the same greenhouse. It will be the same cannabis. It's not that when we say, oh, herbal grade, it's going to be inferior and toxic and contaminated. It's still going to be made to those standards. It's just you don't have to spend potentially hundreds of millions of dollars doing trials that might take 10 years. Also, if we then, backtracking from that, because that's our sort of position on the standards, when it came time to look at the CBD exemption or the descheduling CBD, we thoroughly support that. We would say, again, look at a 2-tier model where you could have pharmaceutical CBD preparations that doctors are happy to prescribe, and then food-grade CBD preparations that you could buy over the counter. This is how it is in America and Canada and Europe. We wouldn't be looking at anything particularly unusual there. We do think that the proposed tolerance needs to be a bit wider. That tolerance came into effect back in September, the 2% of other cannabinoids. There's only 2 products in the world, to my knowledge, that are made to that standard. So it doesn't provide much choice for patients, and it keeps it in that very expensive area. If we had a 5% tolerance, that's what they call the 1 to 20 products, and they're very common overseas, very cheap, still made to GMP standards, and you're still below any kind of level of psychoactivity. So that would increase patient choice and bring down the cost because you would have such a range of products that are available. But I do support what Hikurangi was saying, which is that really the focus should be on the THC level, not the CBD level. That's the control drug aspect of it. The defence for terminally ill patients as well. Now, as a company, we believe that because this is likely to take quite a while before we can get products to market, as I said, we could do it by the end of this year, but in reality, it may be 2 or 3 years away. This is why we think the exemption, the statutory exemption, does need to be widened. We would suggest severe and debilitating as the defining term rather than terminal, and that makes it consistent with terminology that the Ministry of Health already use for prescribing unapproved products and non-pharmaceutical grade products. So it's not inventing anything new. Severe and debilitating covers what they already do. People should be able to procure their cannabis. The exemption lets them use and possess it, but not to grow it or obtain it. That seems a bit anomalous, and we would suggest that perhaps they could be, if they do have this exemption and they qualify, that they could be allowed to obtain it from illicit sources. They could be overseas, perhaps. The patient who has that approval could order some on the internet and show their paperwork to customs and just bring in some for themselves. That would be quite easy. Or perhaps they could procure it from licensed providers, which could be ourselves or other companies. So again, allowing the patients a way to actually obtain it. Finally, the review process, which we're very keen on because we think that the chance of getting this absolutely right from day one is probably quite low, that this will be an ongoing process, and that's why we are quite pleased that a lot of it is done through regulation because it can be easily changed. We're concerned because we don't know what the regulations are, but we're pleased in that they'll be able to be updated. But the review process is currently in the bill. It only reviews the exemption, the statutory exemption for terminal patients. So we would strongly advocating reviewing all of it, and in fact reviewing the entire medical access scheme, all the parts that aren't in this bill. And if we look to Australia, just to bring them up as another example, after 3 years of really not benefiting patients, just last month they amended their regulations and to allow doctors to prescribe cannabinoid products without requiring any ministerial approval. So it's taken them 3 years to get there, but they've realised that was a big problem. And so hopefully we can learn from some of the mistakes that they've made and not get left too far behind. And I did just to address a couple of things. So one was around the export licensing. That is not allowed for any purpose other than research or study. So even if someone, for example, produces a CBD product or something, they can't export anything from here. And in fact, the licensing, Section 14 of MODA is not amended by this bill, but Section 14, subsection 3 prohibits a license being issued for any purpose other than research or study. So there will need to be another law change. If it's not in this bill, it will need to happen quite soon because companies like ourselves will be able to obtain licenses to research, but we actually can't produce anything. We can't bring a single product to market under the current law.
So you're saying even if we add export into that Section 7, we also need to have a supplementary amendment to Section 14, subsection 3?
Yeah, exporting is allowed. You can get export licenses, but it's
but for broader than research and
yes, yeah, Section 14.3. I mean, you could just delete that whole clause because that's the one that says it can only be for research or studies. So if you delete it, then there's no limit put on what the licenses can be issued for.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, haere mai, te Rūnanga o Ngāti Whātua. We have Anthony, Marama and Alexa. And just to let you know, we will be adhering to a strict 15-minute submission time because we have managed to track down Daniel, but we have to ring him, and he's only available to 12:30. So appreciate the whānau have come down from Tamaki Makaurau. So welcome. Thank you very much.
Kia mai tātou pari whatuaru ki te wā, kia tuku atu tātou kore o i tēnei rā, nō reira kia tau te rangi Māori, kia tātou katoa. Nāmu hinui tātou katoa, tā Kaurihira, o te tipu i tēnei rā, nō reira kia tau. Kia ora, I'm Anthony Thompson. I'm the General Manager for Te Rūnanga o Ngāti Whātua Hauora, and I'm also the GM for Te Hāoranga Health Services in Taitokerau and Tamaki Ora. I guess we'll start straight into it. To see the lens from iwi lens, I just need to start with Te Rūnanga o Ngāti Whātua. Ngāti Whātua covers from the Waipawa Forest in Tamaki Makaurau through to Taitokerau. We have 17,500 beneficiaries on our list. We also have an obligation to the people within Tamaki Makaurau and Taitokerau, from Tadgh down through to Auckland. So it's a large area that we do cover. That area in itself is quite conceptualised. We've got an urban Māori whānau, we've also got the rural Māori whānau, and our commitment to supporting whānau is our utmost important thing that we do. I want to draw your attention to Te Hāoranga. Te Hāoranga is our Māori hauora service that we provide. It's a service through delivery of nursing services, doctors, medical centres, and whānau water services. Our clinical auxiliary and whānau water services in particular work with whānau that we have on our provider list at around 2,500 at this stage. So we've got quite a large group of Māori whānau that we work with. I also want to draw your attention now to the Māori Public Health Unit. I'll introduce Alexa Forrest-Payne, our Public Health Manager, and Marama Pairama, our Māori Public Health Kaimanaki. Over the last few weeks, our Public Health Unit have gone around to the rohe o Ngāti Whātua to get feedback and information from whānau so we can prepare our submission. Initially, we weren't going to deliver, but the need was that important and that such dire that whānau wanted us to present and to prove, there is a point to the whole submission that they wanted to present. I'm going to start with a story. Last year I lost my dad to bone cancer. And it's funny when something personal happens to you, you all of a sudden change your paradigm or your perception of things. And it was at that point that I started to realise that alternative medicines, rongoa, were really important. Not just for my whānau, but for our whole marae, hapu and iwi. And that's really the starting of how we became part of this whole kaupapa. That's why Te Rūnanga o Ngāti Whātua, through the Māori Public Health Unit, support the decriminalisation of cannabis for medical purposes.
Kia ora. We also acknowledge that this bill is addressing activity in the community that is already occurring, and some of our people are often in risky situations and trying to manage their own pain using this way to do it, and facing sometimes prosecution around that. We engaged with a lot of the community. We sat and listened to their stories. They shared their struggles, their risk, and how they constantly are putting themselves in danger dealing with drug dealers in order to get their product. Quite often the stuff that they're accessing is not suited to their illness, so they're just taking whatever's available and having to drug deal themselves to get rid of what they've got in order to get the right cannabinoid strand that they need.
Kia ora. So promoting equity for Māori is the key purpose of us being here today. It's well known that within Aotearoa there are large inequities seen between Māori and non-Māori in a range of social determinants and health outcomes. Therefore, it's imperative for all of us to ensure that this bill will not further perpetuate inequities. However, we view that within this current proposed bill, there are certain aspects that will not help to achieve this equity goal. For example, the cost of current prescribed products is high, and consumers are often low income or on a sickness benefit and are not able to access these products. Also, this bill will allow patients to obtain or consume cannabis, but not to cultivate their own. So therefore, patients are forced to rely on a black market supply until a regulated domestic supply is established. This creates unnecessary risk on patients and their whānau, particularly as we already experience a disproportionate manner of Māori in our prisons. So within our submission, you'll see a number of recommendations, but today we just wanted to talk about the three that we deem to be very important. So the first one is that we believe that this bill should be extended to cover those beyond terminally ill. So the bill proposes to introduce the statutory defence for terminally ill people that's defined as an illness from which a person can reasonably be expected to die within 12 months. But the Rūnanga views this criteria as being too conservative and that it should be broadened beyond that. Instead, we recommend that the criteria applies to those experiencing a severe and debilitating illness. As a compassionate measure, we must consider how important we deem the quality of life of our people, and a medicinal cannabis scheme has the capacity to provide benefit to many people who are experiencing chronic and crippling pain but are not necessarily defined as terminally ill. We found this a lot in our engagements with our own people. There's a lot of current users that don't fall under this criteria, so this bill's not going to help them, and they're just going to continue to be exposed to this unnecessary risk.
And also, Te Rūnanga o Ngāti Whātua recommends that the statutory defence extends to cover support people. Guidelines around what this would look like would need to be determined, for example, a nominated whānau member or someone that they trust per patient. Often terminally ill patients can't administer their own medication, so this could result in whānau placing themselves again in unsafe situations. Because in my experience as a kaimanaki, trying to get community members to see their own kind of positive solutions has always been a struggle, and we try and offer effective and practical solutions for them, but they will decide what they want to do and they'll do it how they want to do it. So being able to provide a regulated support system for whānau to access product that is affordable and available would eliminate risk. So good guidelines to be put in place about nominating a particular whānau member would definitely help them.
Finally, we're also looking at the economic opportunities. As stated earlier in previous submissions, there's an opportunity to grow domestic products, and that to be done through iwi hatu marae. As previously presented, there's employment opportunities, there's education opportunities, there's also hauora opportunities through rongoa. So there's a whole raft of employment and internal opportunities that could actually support not just iwi Māori, but the whole of New Zealand. And it's actually interesting. It's a shame that Matt's had to leave because, you know, some models, who's to say that Super Fund couldn't be a producer? You know, there's so many options that we haven't explored yet. We've talked about, but we actually haven't seen some finer detail. And it's really interesting to note that financially, you know, a person can be whatever they want to be with the right resources and mechanisms. You know, and whānau have the choice to choose their own destiny. If we had the resources, the opportunities to do that, where could we be? So, in a whole, it's our presentation and our recommendations to the Select Committee. Thank you for that. We really appreciate the time. And as you can see, our lens has really been more about people, whānau, hapu, iwi, and marae. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. We have a question from Dr. Shane Reti.
Kia ora koutou mō tō kororo I tēnei ata mō tēnei mahihirihira. I think, Anthony, we may have spoken last week, and Alexa, and we're looking forward to joining you in June. So nice to see you all in Maribor as well. Tēnā koe. Okay, let's join a couple of items together, please. Your item 10 and item 20 seem to be saying the same. That is, as we move to the regulatory making environment, you want to say. In fact, you go further than that in item 20, saying, we recommend that further definition of what the framework and setting of standards would look like is constructed through nationwide consultation. So you're seeing the regulatory making authority that the next steps from here are still being determined, and when they're determined, you'd like consultation on what that might look like. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So we're saying that we want to be considered, but we also think, you know, we are one of many iwi across the country, and not just iwi, but, you know, all people should have a say in what this looks like. So I think that's what we were...
There's a definite need for Māori, especially iwi, to have a tikanga Māori view. And sometimes I look at the rongoa framework and how the framework is set up. And, you know, eventually when the bill does go through its final reading, the framework will be the framework, the policy will be the policies, and the process will be the process. But in the totality of it all, we still need, as Māori, a tikanga and a kaupapa to go by. Be that, you know, through the Ministry of Health guidelines, or be that through consultation. There's a combination that we could work with.
Okay. Item 11, where you're raising the question of a certificate from a medical practitioner and validly raising the question of costs of access, etc. I then don't see any recommendation that ties to that. Are you suggesting that a medical practitioner be taken out of this process completely?
Not necessarily. So we were just raising the question rather than providing a solution, because if we had all the answers to how to fix Māori health, then, you know, that would be the case. We just wanted to raise the issue that, you know, already there's major barriers for Māori accessing primary health care. We don't want this bill to disadvantage them, that if they are in fact ill and would legally fall under this bill to be able to use it, but they just haven't made that step to access the medical practitioner. Like, is there some sort of way that we can provide some sort of...
So it's like a verification process from their GP about what medical condition they have.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you saying you don't want medical practitioners
it's
involved. It's just highlighting the access issue, and that this bill does nothing about that.
Yes.
That it's still there even for those who have need under this bill.
And that's about them going to the doctor and having to pay $29 or $8 or whatever that may be.
Transport to get to the doctor in the first place. So it wasn't removing the medical practitioner from the equation. It was just how do we address these barriers.
Who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
Cool.
And a good example of that is our provider list. We've got about 70% of our whānau on our provider list who are in that exact situation. High risk, transients, uncontactable, living in isolated areas. So it's really looking at resources and access for them as well.
You have a really innovative all of whānau health scheme that you're rolling out. The insurers, do they have a view on this? Because some of the insurers in the US, for example, want to stand well back from anything to do with opioids, cannabis, etc. I'm just interested to know, do your insurers have a view on this?
I think that's a TBC commissioner, really. We haven't gone down that track yet, and I think there's been discussions around it. But at this stage, as part of the insurance industry, they're looking at what liabilities they have and what conditions they'll have to go under. So really, that's still up in the air at the moment.
Thank you.
No further questions? I really appreciate your submission. Thank you for making the effort, and actually thank you for also making us look at this legislation through the lens of whānau hapu anyway. It's been incredibly valuable. Thank you. Okay, that is the end of our submissions for today, everybody. And we will need to clear the room, please.